we'll get into in a minute. I'm here with Alice, co-host and Taproot therapist, and then Kearney Smith. And Kearney is appearing actually because he is dead. Like a while ago, he was declared legally dead. And then since then, he's been able to see through the veil to the other side. Not really. Just kidding.
Well, I don't
Kearney,
know. I sort of relate to that.
yeah. Or maybe. Yeah. Actually, one of the problems with death is that we don't know what happens. You can't really see past it. There's some good guesses that people have made. Until now, Kearney actually has a 12-step program that he's selling. It's pretty expensive, but for knowledge like that, that's pretty valuable. So I'm just an Adeptus Praetorian, like I'm on level 3 and have the orange belt. So anyway, he's going to tell us about that, and we're going to be disbanding our business to follow him across the country as he seeks converts.
Well, Taproot necromancy is going to be the next.
Yes, just kidding. Kearney's a nurse. He's one of the smartest guys that I know. He also will get into his story, but he is very interested into death as a symbol and death as a practical reality. And I'm really glad that there are people cut out to be friends with me. So thank you for appearing on our podcast. And I mean, I think like when we talking about this, the practical realities of the funeral situations of our current times, and then a lot of different traditions of the past of just practical. What do you do when somebody dies? And then also just that death is kind of like a symbol or psychological reality. So I don't know where the discussion will go. For people who are tuning in on the podcast and not on the video, to really get into this episode, I'm wearing black lipstick. I also have a t-shirt with a tire track down it and some 2004 jeans with lots of zippers that are black and a Night Bear Before Christmas branded fedora. So I really went all out to get ready for it. His eyeballs are popping out like a wolf. So his tongue's on the table. And he's clapping. He's clapping as he sees what people.
I'm slamming my fist on the table and going awooga. I'm log.
Bow tie is spinning around.
My bow tie is spinning.
There was a rug under him just a minute ago. Now it's shot behind him. All right. Okay, Kearney. So I'll start with when me and my wife went to Louisiana. We were looking at the beautiful, like above ground cemeteries that are so affecting and interesting as they're kind of a practical reality that there's flooding. So you have to keep the bodies in a box because if you just bury them, they'll float back up to the top. And we were coming back and we were like, how do those work? Like, do you keep putting new ones in, or like how many can you stack? And I was like, I bet Kearney knows the answer to this question. And we called Kearney, and about an hour and 20 minutes later, we knew a lot of things about that. But one of the things I didn't know about you that came up in that conversation is that you wanted to be a mortician.
Mm-hmm.
You want to talk about your journey and fascination with death?
Yeah, I think, just ever since I was little, I think I want to say my first encounters with death when I was little honestly scared the bejesus out of me. I remember going to a funeral for a distant relative and just finding the whole thing like, and of course, at the time I didn't think this, but looking back, it was this very weird Kubrickian moment of walking into this room, this bizarre lighting, and just barely seeing like this dead guy's nose just poking up over the rim of the casket and just thinking like, this is so weird and uncomfortable. And then when it happened to closer relatives, of course, that was super upsetting. But I think part of my defense mechanism to that was just turning into an interest instead. So there was a little while where I was gonna go to school, be a mortician, and the thing that stopped it for me is honestly, I don't know. I don't think I'm a ruthless enough salesman to be a good like funeral director. A lot of that you do have to basically just like own and operate the business. That or get involved with a corporate, funeral home business, and that gets. Yeah, I find it all very predatory, and I mean to be granted, like. Modern medicine is also kind of predatory in some ways, but it is very, very much, particularly in the funeral industry, there is a very big financial incentive to kind of screw you over.
When people are at their worst time too.
That's the thing I can't do is I can't countenance the idea of like someone who's just lost their parent and me just like Big Lebowski style being like it's our modestly priced receptacle.
Just thinking about dropping that in right there, that clip.
Yeah.
Look, just because we're bereaved doesn't make us sad.
Sir, please lower your voices.
Man, don't you have, something else we can put them in,
Most modestly priced
that
receptacle.
exact thing, like, and that's that's sick. At least as a nurse, I know that like I'm trying to help people get better. And I don't know, like, who knows down the line, like, I don't know if they ever start really getting big into like eco burials. Like, I could see myself retraining to maybe do eco-friendly embalmings. That would be a lot of fun. And the process, like, I already got kind of a leg up on it.
Yeah, that was the genesis for this, is we wanted to interview that author, and she wasn't available. But there's a lot of critique now of
Caitlin Doty.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, she's so good, and if you can get a hold of her, like, she's
on sabbatical, so we'll try again next year.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that I will be honest, a lot of stuff I know has also been from like watching, and her book, like, From Here to Eternity, is fantastic.
Yeah.
Like she does a lot of good stuff, and is also very much into the eco burial movement, which I think is really cool, because I mean, much like everything else, like the modern American funeral industry is not sustainable. It's just, and it's, between it not being sustainable and also just by its nature kind of being predatory, it's like, look, we need to shift the system around. I mean, like most things, but. And
I think you mean by not sustainable, not that it's like total zero carbon or totally green or something. You mean like it is something that, excuse me, need a cough button, not possible to do probably for another 20 years.
Probably a comment, like the expenditure of resources plus particularly in the United States, I mean, we have so much land that, you can get away with like opening up a whole big cemetery and still have plots. Like in Europe, they don't do that. In Germany, for example, like when you buy a plot, you rent that plot for a period of, I want to say 15 to 20 years. Don't quote me on that, but it's just long enough for whoever's in there to break down and decompose fully, and then it's open to new arrivals. Germany's a small
country. Not using it anymore.
Yeah, and it's like, sorry, go ahead.
Do they stack them? How does that work? Baskets? Like, how do they let somebody else use the plot?
I think part of it is they also dig deep. Typically, I think at least some European cemeteries, they also will have a general ossuary where they'll contain the bone remains. They'll exhume the bones, put them in the general ossuary. So your loved one's still in the cemetery. They're just in like the communal living space of the cemetery.
It's kind of how a memorial garden is, that you have a tile, commemorating the person, but the ashes are scattered into the garden.
Yeah. Well, it's a thing of, we are very fortunate now that we have like enough land to honestly be fairly wasteful with it, but it's like, that's not probably long-term. You can't keep doing that. So you're going to have to find something new. I mean, a great fictional example recently, because I've watched Jenny play through a fair bit of. This is going to be a weird digression, but I swear it relates to this. I've been watching.
You like those on here?
I've been watching Jenny play Cyberpunk 2077, and she specifically, I remember, called me in at one point. I was like, "Hey, Kearney, come take a look at this." And she was showing me the cemetery that they have in game, and it is very cool, because it's like you don't have enough room to bury everyone in the future, so it's all just one gigantic like columbarium. It's little slots where people's ashes go. That's for everyone. It's just these stretching like monoliths of columbariums going off to the distance. Really cool image, and also just a very creative way of like, yeah, that is probably how you're going to have to deal with this in the future.
There was a week where I was doing brain spotting at the clinic, and one of the resourcing things we don't use all the time is the brain spotting music that David Grand made, where it slowly goes back and forth between year to year, but at a kind of rate your brain can't predict, and it changes. And I had a wrong button on the device. And so there was like a week where I played the Cyberpunk 2077 soundtrack for everybody doing brain spotting. And people were being like, this music's pretty weird. It's like, yeah, David's an odd guy. He played guitar, he wrote those songs, but it was like Keanu Reeves singing punk rock. So I clarified it later, but I got a kick out of that. Alice, do you have any kind of first experience with death or thoughts on death, funeral story? Any, I don't know, to kind of kick off your perspective?
The first experiences, it's sort of like, it doesn't, like, I remember being really little, or I mean, maybe up until like middle school or something, feeling like it was weird that grownups made such a big deal out of death. Like at those ages, I was like, what's the big deal? You're just not here anymore. And
Mhm.
so I somehow had some sense that it was like, I wasn't here 5 years ago or, yesterday, not a big deal.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if that's a common feeling or if that was like in children, but
My theory is that children react to adults' emotion around things more than they endogenously just kind of learn. They come into the world reacting to these things in a vacuum. I mean, everyone's different, but I think a lot of why would culture be different in another place? You're learning how people react to these things and what their role in your life is, like a myth or whatever, based on how people talk about something or don't talk about it.
Yeah. I knew my great grandparents and they lived way out in the country. And were kind of, I guess, like Southern Baptist sort of background. And I remember each of those grandparents dying around when I was like 6th grade or 5th or 4th grade. So old enough for me to really remember. But what I remember the hymns that we sang.
Mm-hmm.
I remember what hymn we sang at my great grandmother's funeral. And then I remember whether or not the caskets were open or not. Which was sort of funny because it was like my grandmother, their daughter, really wanted an open casket for their funerals because it was what the communities would expect. But it was like our generation and my parents' generation, like my mother, who it was her grandmother who had died, and her sister, they were sort of mortified about it. Ended. And we're kind of talking sideways in the family about how tacky it was to have an open casket funeral. So there were just like this very weird kind of conversations that would go on, like as to whether whether something to do with death is tacky or not. I don't.
Yeah. That was kind of my experience. I remember when I was a kid, like just kind of liminality. I was always sort of interested in that, and also just irony when things was like, oh, we have to pretend like this makes sense, but we all know it doesn't. I was always kind of like, wait a minute, as a kid, and probably still am, a lot of that trickster archetype. But my great grandmother died the day before her 100th birthday, and so we were going to go to bury her, and she was, I think, half gypsy and half Native American. Cherokee. And so her parents or her mother, I don't think she knew her father. Her mother was like very transient and kind of like came to town and fixed pots and stuff. Like she came from poverty on that side. And then she married the guy he was the son of the Church of Christ priest, my great grandfather. And then also his family owned the grist mill in this town that is not there anymore. But it was like the biggest like upgrade ever. Like she made whatever you wanted out of life in 1920, and there's a family cemetery up there, but the town's gone, so it's like we had to pay to clear it, and then no one's ever seen it, and we had to drive up there. Probably the last, I guess I could be buried there if I wanted to. Anybody in the family could be, but it's just on a mountain where there used to be a town that's gone. And so the irony of that was really neat, where it was just like, this was the most important thing ever in the cemetery. It's supposed to last forever. And then it's wilderness. It's gone. It's been reclaimed. And then going there, carving it out, and everyone had grown up hearing stories. We don't know whose uncle he was or whatever, but Uncle Charlie was running along a train when he was a kid, in 1918 or something, and fell and then had his arm cut off by the train, which is a problem because for that branch of Church of Christ, the resurrection of the flesh means that you need your meat body. It's not just your soul, that the resurrection, you get up out of the ground somehow. And so you have to have your arm. So the arm was buried before Charlie was buried by, a couple decades. And so we were looking for it, and we found like a cemetery of Charlie somebody, and there was a little tombstone next to it that had marked where the arm was before they put it down. And so just being, and then, just like, my grandmother, my aunt was kind of complaining about having to spend money on my grandmother when she would want, she was kind of older and neurotic when she was older, and she was like, oh, look at the suit. She would have loved that suit. I got her the one she wanted. It was like, she's dead. Like all of it was, I don't know, just kind of going around in my brain. So it's just kind of a wild concept. Irvin Yalom says staring at the sun, that it's kind of affecting everything, but you can't look right at it. You can't really see it.
Well, just going back actually to Alice's point about, I laughed at people throwing shade. Oh, it's tacky to have an open casket. Like that's so wonderfully human. Like you can't help but still be like gossipy and quippy at someone's funeral.
Right.
It is that is a funny point though regarding like people that changing over time, where more people are having closed casket funerals, because there is a debate surrounding whether actually viewing a body like that is psychologically healthy or not, whether that what the funeral industry claims is a memory picture that you get, is that actually helpful for you? Or would it be more helpful to see this person in a more natural state of death, where they have the pallor of death, where they do look slack? Like, does that help more simply because that allows you to kind of decouple and realize, like, yes, this person is gone. They are now just the physical meat left. And of course, the way they do it in a lot of modern funerals is they make you up, of course. They make you look as lifelike as possible. They have specifically lights right above the caskets that shine down these very nice little pink lights that soften the features tremendously. I actually had a recent experience with it because my grandmother very recently passed away from a long illness. And it was the kind of thing where I was not there when she passed. And for me, it was actually very helpful to go see her one last time, like to be able to, and it was like just a private viewing. It was literally where I went in there. I was just like, yeah, they have the casket open for me. I could see Sand real quick, and that helped bring me some closure. Like, I know that helped me, but I do know it is an interesting open debate as to the way that we do it. So dolled up and stylized, whether that's actually helpful or not, you know?
Mm. And when we had called you to ask about how those crypts functioned, I mean, you started basically with the Civil War. You were like, well, the beginning of the funeral industry in America was the Civil War, because there are all these bodies that had to be shipped across the country and that had never been seen before. So they started to fill them up with poison, which was really bad to get them back home. I mean, not to do a huge history lesson, but can you give us like a little bit of the practical realities of the birth of the funeral industry?
Okay, so and I don't know this history backwards and forwards. So any viewers, if you want to call me out, please do. I can't guarantee my accuracy, but yeah, it did start.
File a complaint with the nursing board. Don't send me an email.
Yeah, please don't at me, please. I'm not but it did start more or less because during the Civil War there were so many bodies on the battlefield that it was like the only practical thing you could do really was just bury them right there if you had the resources. Because particularly in the campaigns here in the South, like, I'm sorry, in the midst of summer, like, bodies are going to start they're going to start decomposing like immediately in that kind of heat. And there was a tremendous problem also trying to ship bodies home on trains. Trains started being like, no, we're not taking any more like rotting corpses. I'm sorry, it's nasty.
Well, we bought a ticket.
Yeah, we're not handling this anymore. So eventually they I think, what was his name? It was I can't remember the father of embalming. I'll look it up on the side while we're talking. But they began embalming corpses using an arsenic solution. Which of course is very effective, but it's also very easy to make yourself sick with arsenic. But that's
not good for the ground either, or the food.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
There's the groundwater. Yes,
and I mean, same thing to a certain degree with modern embalming chemicals like formaldehyde, formalin. Is I mean, they are generally pretty carcinogenic. But yeah, old styles of embalming used arsenic, which is pretty nasty. They quickly began to realize, like, this is not really a safe way to do this. Let's try something different. And there have been many like different styles of embalming, not only throughout history, but even in modern embalming. Like there were, I think, a couple of different takes on how you could do this until kind of the modern method of arterial embalming, where you basically have an in point and an exit point, and you're trying to pump in embalming through it, pump out blood, and clear out everything as much as possible so the body is preserved for generally about a week. Like, modern embalming is not meant to be permanent either, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise.
A week? I didn't know. That's very short.
Yes, yeah, no, it is Thomas Holmes. That was him. That was considered the father of modern embalming. And yeah, he was one of the early people in the Civil War who started setting up their embalming tents and offering to embalm people. There were also some controversies about particularly unscrupulous embalmers that would be like, hey, I embalmed your son. I'm not releasing the body until you pay me the fee. And the family being, we didn't want you to embalm them. We will come collect the remains another time. Like it got a little nasty at a certain point. But yeah, modern embalming is not really meant to last more than a week. Now, if it's stronger embalming, because they can change the ratios of formalin to water, and depending if the body needs to be shipped across the country, they'll typically do stronger embalming. But there are examples of like when a body has had to be exhumed for one reason or another, they've discovered like, oh, this embalming took pretty hard, actually. It's not always the case, but sometimes they will find like, yeah, let's see. I know what was his? That's another one I got to go look up. But yeah, there's been several examples of where they've particularly for like murder investigations, like exhumed someone, popped up the casket, and be like, we can do a normal autopsy. Like this body is actually well preserved enough for that. So that's as a rule a week, but not always.
Alice, do you have anything about like kind of like the spiritual or psychological role of death you see in your practice? You know, Kearney's kind of the practical, existential part of this. But I don't know. You have any thoughts? I mean, the juxtaposition between kind of the role death plays in religion and psychology that we kind of sanitize, and then just the realities of what happens. I don't know, they're just kind of interesting. I thought sitting with that would make for a neat discussion.
Yeah. Nothing off the top of my head from my practice. One thing you were making me think about is I had heard, or there's a guru in India who talks about how the body takes 13 days for all of the cells. Hush. Sorry.
He's fine if he wants to say hey. He's welcome to say hey. Violet will pop in sometimes.
But supposedly it takes 13 days for all of the cells to die. And so they don't want to bury the bodies before it's been 13 days because they still see it as the spirit still there in the body. But I'm not sure. I don't know I think, there's a lot of ancient science that actually ends up being, if we studied it now, it's actually pretty accurate, but I'm not sure how true that is. Or
a lot of the grieving periods, like different sects of Judaism have those too. I mean, a lot of it served kind of a practical role too, of that, pre-scientific medicine, you couldn't always tell if somebody was dead. There are some conditions that could make you...
Premature burial was actually a risk at one time. Because the modern understanding of how to actually determine whether someone was dead or not was very shaky. During the Victorian era, they actually developed early resuscitation kits, ways to revive people from them being drowned. And the thing is, they didn't take off immediately because that idea freaked people out so much that you could appear dead and not be dead. Like that was a nightmare for some people. That's why you saw the advent in Germany towards the end of the 1800s of waiting mortuaries, which were basically these big mortuaries that you left your family member out to effectively begin decomposing. Once those signs appeared, you could safely bury them.
Wait, not too long.
And it's the same thing. Like there was technology like coffins that you could bury and have a bell set up above them, where if the body twitched, like, oh, they're alive, it'll ring the bell. Not actually the origin of Saved by the Bell, even though people sometimes talk about that. There was also like spring-loaded.
Insert clip here.
Yeah, insert clip.
Cause I'm saved by love. It's alright. Cause I'm saved by love. It's alright. Cause I'm saved by the bell.
But yeah, like that was a true fear for a long time until we were able to establish more modern medical methods of verifying someone is dead. People were very scared of the concept of being buried alive because
I still am, to be honest.
No, it is terrifying. Like that's absolutely horrifying. But yeah, you even there's famous individuals in American history. Like I think Washington said, leave out my body for 4 days before burying me. There's multiple examples of that sort of thing.
I don't do a ton of like kind of like hypnotic suggestion and like guided imagery. Just a ton of, it's not what most people need, but the people that I have done it with, that is a pretty reoccurring image that they feel like they are buried, like they're in a box and they need to break through and somehow get out and engage with their life. I think it's kind of interesting. That's come up a couple times.
That is, yeah. You had just, this is kind of a pivot, but you had asked about in my practice what experience I have, and something just popped in my head when we were talking about children and how they see death. I remember that little children talking about death is very fascinating. There was a maybe like a 4-year-old little boy who was coming. His parents had brought him in. I can't remember what it was. It might have even been a court ordered thing, but his parents brought him in for assessment. And I don't usually work with kids that little, so by themselves. I would work with them generally with a family, but it was just me and him. And so I was trying to, do some art therapy, and he said something about how he said, "Oh, my friend, I talk to my friend Matt when I play outside." And I was like, "Oh, that's nice. Is that, who is that?" And he said, "He's a bird." And I was like, "Oh, okay." Got some, talked to him about the bird that he talks to outside, who's a cardinal. And then I brought this up to his parents, and they said, "Wait, who?" And whatever the name was, it was specific enough that they were like, "That's somebody who was our neighbor, who's friends with our son, who got killed in a car crash a few months ago." And they were like, "We didn't even know that he knew that had happened. Like, it wasn't somebody that they thought, it wasn't somebody that the family had been talking about having passed away." And stuff.
But
like
he knew
that.
somehow. He picked up on some kind of energy that this.
Yeah.
Just the way adults avoid something, I think a lot of times gives kids information.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's, and I'll have people who've had like very spiritual experiences like that, where they've seen loved ones who pass on and things like that, and but people don't want to tell you that stuff. Like I would guess.
You think they think the therapist is uncomfortable with it?
Yeah,
or
I think they think the therapist is going to think they're crazy, which is a no word. But I think there's this sense of, because I would occasionally get someone who this would sort of come up, like maybe they had what they felt like they were premonitions about things, and it was like they really didn't want to crack into talking about that until I normalized it for them, like experiences of loved ones after death. But yeah, it's something that people do not want to talk about with therapists, I think. I mean, unless you're really put yourself out there as a death kind of death and dying expert. But I don't know if
is there such a thing?
I mean, you can probably find researchers that technically fill that niche, but I don't know if there's anyone. I don't know how much like actual serious study has been put into. I mean, I'm sure it's scattered about, but not being kind of like centralized study of this sort of.
It's they go back to death in a lot of different scientific, soft sciences, anthropology, sociology, a ton. Like one of the ways that when they're looking at evolution and they're like, when is the brain that is developing in the evolving human not an animal? When is there some kind of awareness of something else? And the thing that they look for is, when do we start to bury people or do something? We don't have to bury them, but like when grandma just falls over and everyone keeps walking on to eat the apple, like that's not human in our mind. And then it is human when we stop and hoot and wink, or there are, some kind of ritual that recognizes this. That's what they're looking for a ton of the time. And I don't know, we still have those rituals, it was the beginning of our humanity. Robert Pogue Harrison, who I'd love to have on here, but he's not interested in my emails so far. But he wrote the Dominion of the Dead. And one of the points he makes in there is that social animals are the most vocal when something dies. And so when you're looking at when did we have kind of the synesthetic connection between sound and meaning, when did we say like, oh wait, my mouth can make these noises, but I could fit little meanings in here. I could make this into a code, differentiating between different things. It probably was around death, because you have animals that, like an animal dies, the lion mom roars, certain vocalization for the baby. And and maybe calling it to come back or whatever, when the people are around and they're, mourning, slowly these noises start to mean different things.
And yeah, and particularly throughout human history, there's been a tradition of like vocal mourning, not necessarily in
Rome had paid mourners. You had to pay people to scream.
The ancient Egyptians paid mourners.
Yeah.
Of Irish keening, there's lots of ways that people have turned their grief into these very loud vocal expressions, which is not as common, particularly I think the modern West, but I mean we still see it, and it certainly is something that has occurred in the past.
I think it might be Alan Wolfelt. I don't know if do you know him, Joel? He's an expert in grief and loss. Oh shoot. Well, I was going to say he talks. I just lost my point that I was going to say. What did you?
I was talking about burial, Kearney.
Yeah.
Mourning.
Grieving, grief and loss in that way, vocal grieving. That it's people adjust way more to have better adjustment to death when in cultures where they do the vocalizations of grief. And likewise, he's really big on, what you were saying about burial ritual being such an important part of coping with death in the psychological world, and how in kind of modern society we do funerals, but I mean modern Western society, we do funerals, but we've really stripped away a lot of the ritual. We don't, in Jewish funerals, you have several days of Shiva that you sit, and more if it's depending on who the person was and what the role is, and where people come and gather at the house, and it's like an open house for people to come grieve and come by. And people in Jewish faith do a lot better with death than in other cultures, just because of these kind of traditions and rituals that actually, because it's not only a transition. We talk about whatever we think about the spirituality of death, but like a transition from being alive to not being here anymore, whatever that transition is.
Well, it's also kind of a death of the participant in the ritual too. If my parents die, that means that I'm something different. Part of me has died and I'm in a new role, so it is a transition on two levels.
That transition. And exactly. Kind of the transition of the family, like letting the person go, and everyone getting to have the moment of kind of reckoning of, coming over to the house and they're not there anymore. I think it was really healing for me after my grandmother passed away, who is my very closest relative. And I was at her house when, she was in the hospital. It was just kind of out of the blue. So everything in the house it wasn't like a sick person's house. It was all, where I usually would have spent the night and stuff. And so I was still spending, I'd gone up to see her and was spending the night in my bed where I would usually stay. And then there were people at the house, and it sort of it was very comforting to be able to be there in her house, and like where is one of the most comforting places to me, but be in that environment and really, those types of experiences can be healing. Yeah.
Well, I think a good point's made there is like when the transition of death becomes almost entirely transactional, which it is in the modern American funeral industry in particular, that strips out all the ritualism of it. It feels very hollow when you're just paying some dude in a bad suit to put on like that CD of very obnoxious, sad, twinkly piano music and shine a pink light on your relative. That feels incredibly hollow and empty. I can imagine that, people can walk away from funerals feeling very unfulfilled because of that.
How old? Oh, I'm sorry, Greg.
That was when my grandmother passed away. We very deliberately we actually avoided almost all the traffic in the funeral. I was the only one that saw her in the casket, and that was just because I hadn't seen her when she passed. After that, we did a crypt side service. Like she was already in the crypt, put away. Like we pulled out photos and just had a good reminiscing session. And that felt really, really good. Because I think it is. I think honestly, the healthiest way to deal with death is having the family involved. Like as much as you can take care of your deceased relative and not hand it off entirely to some other group of people, probably the better you're going to feel psychologically at the end, I would think.
Alice, how old did you say the child was that was talking to the cardinal that you had?
4.
Yeah. There's a part in Yalom where he gets a little bit more speculative in existential therapy. I think it's kind of interesting, but he kind of speculates that kids, I don't know the age range, but he says basically at 2, they know what death is and they're fine with it. And then by 4, they kind of start not being able to accept it anymore. And that by like 6 or 7, they have a very adult-like, almost religious defense mechanism against the reality of death. And he's talking about how a lot of 2-year-olds and things like they like kind of know something's wrong. Like 3, 4, they'll see a bird that dies in the yard as the example he gives, and they're like yelling at the parent to put it back in the nest or to make it talk. And they have this they're kind of enamored with it. But then if you come back to the same kids and you talk about that by the time they're 6, 7, then they have like some sort of defense mechanism against death where they're like, no, he went to another world and there's this world, or like I actually have magic so I can see that. But there's something that the brain creates to help them understand this thing that they can kind of accept when they're younger, which is kind of an interesting part about Yalom. I wish he said more about that. It's just 2 pages in there. But it's one of the more interesting kind of speculations that he makes.
Yeah.
Do you think some of that is them beginning to kind of internalize how other people around them are reacting? Or, I mean,
he doesn't say. I'd say that. I mean, I remember I worked with kids in my first job out of college. I had a group, and there was like someone's dad died, and there were parents who were like, it wasn't like a formal funeral either. It was like a big kind of celebration of life. Everybody dressed casually, music and whatever, but they were like stopping their kids from going, who were like 6th grade, 7th grade. I mean, not really young. And they were like, well, they're just so young. I don't want them to be around that. And I was like, no, this is normal. This is natural. Like the lesson that you're teaching here is not good. This fear does not go away. This thing does not normalize itself. And I think like we do have a culture that just hides death away from children, from everybody. Mm-hmm. And we have this sort of, probably fueled by, capital, this like need to sell you something, and we pretend to be young forever and ever. And then you having done some Jerry Psych and some like hospice social work, people don't know how to die. They never, maybe we know intellectually that we do, but we don't ever have any tools to approach that phase of life. And it is a part of life. I don't know. I mean, do you see that, Alice? The kind of like just fear of death that we have here, that it's not something that I don't think is even normal or human, honestly. It's kind of contra.
Yeah. I've noticed this with my son who's in kindergarten. And there was, my dad doesn't fish, but for some reason he was like, I've got to take Hank fishing. It's like, I guess you turn into a grandfather, and then it's like, okay, I never learned to fish. I've got to figure this out. But so we go to the lake with a fishing pole. And so it turns out my dad's he's not actually into it because because he's an emergency room physician. And then it's all of a sudden like he's saying, well, it kind of makes me sad to catch the fish. And even when my father got really sad about, a fish that he had caught, like a little fish that he had caught, and then couldn't get the hook out right and didn't know what, and then my dad didn't want to really fish anymore. And I thought it was really interesting. But my son, I'm not sure if he even really processed that was happening, but there were some other kids there showing him how to do the fishing rod. And there was a little fish that they ended up, it was like this group of children trying to revive this fish on the dock. And like the 3 of them, like it was like 30 minutes of them like trying to resuscitate this fish. And I think they got it to like flap around again. Like, and so they were thinking, okay, we're really gonna bring it back to life. But it was this whole thing where it's like, and then my dad and I were kind of pacing around awkwardly, like not really, not wanting to say no, it's really not coming back to life. Because I mean, you feel bad saying that when it's a kid, but then it was like, well, the lesson teaches itself, because he, eventually is like, okay, well, it's not going to work. Let's go.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, but I something else you were making me think. I remember, adults trying to hide death. And so there were several times where I was like on a trip or something when I was young, and there would be somebody who passed away, and they didn't want to tell me because I was out of town. And then it was like the funeral had happened and everything happened while I wasn't there, and nobody let me know. Or one time I was in college and a great aunt died, and I didn't find out until like a couple weeks later. And I was so mad that it was like this, even as like a 20-year-old, it feels like the people in older generations were still trying to like brush things under the rug. And yeah, there's a lot of discomfort with death in Anglo-American families for sure.
I know Stephen Jenkins is a palliative care counselor that's written some books. He's interesting, but he always talks about us not being comfortable with death, and then the cultural problems and vulnerabilities that we have. I mean, Kearney started talking about people getting basically conned, when they're grieving a loved one. I mean, there's a lot of vulnerability that Americans have about death that I think we don't notice. I mean, even like makeup is like, you'll be 10 years younger, you'll last forever. It's like they don't just start selling you mortuary makeup when you're dead. I mean, they start when you're 12.
That was actually that was also something with the industry, is they had to stop claiming that embalming could preserve you forever, because they absolutely tried to claim that at first. And with the arsenic, I mean, yeah,
laminator.
Yeah, you also became very toxic. But I mean, but yeah, it's like much like any industry for profit, like, yeah, they're gonna sell you the rosiest possible picture they can. They're not gonna tell you that, like, yeah, this isn't gonna last forever, and it's probably gonna get a little nasty towards the end.
Well, and I think that's the birth of Buddhism, right? The earliest thing that we can tell that Hinduism is splitting off and doing something kind of different is that the Hindu a lot of the religious figures just start hanging out in charnel pits looking at bodies. And it's kind of like, the glittering Dharma and moksha and temple and, pathway to God through the self was maybe a little bit avoidant. And then they start being like, hey, we die, or is this really real? Whatever they're psychically chewing on. Buddhism goes a different direction than Hinduism does to handle an anxiety that the culture's maybe not sitting with. I mean, y'all have any ideas about how good death could be a more, Kearney knows a lot about religious practices around the world, like a more natural or sustainable or psychologically healthy process? Are there other examples out there?
I think, I really think it would be cool if people started leaning into kind of like mortuary gardens, like places where you could just naturally bury people, and maybe you could have a small marker, but also it's like, it's not a lawn like we have now. It's actually, you can see stuff like blooming and growing, partially from the fact that, your loved one is going back into the environment. At least for me, that would make me very comfy. I'd love to go be like, hey, let's go take a hike through the gardens, go see so and so real quick.
Well, you're going back anyway. Just how long do you want to put it off?
Yeah,
10 years, 100 years, like we are headed back into something that is not really an avoidable destination, no matter how much formaldehyde.
I mean, it's just, in the end, we will eventually hit a point where it's like, look, we got to start disposing of people in more efficient and sustainable ways. Alkaline hydrolysis is starting to get big, which I hope that they start implementing that as a greener method of doing cremations. The idea of it freaks people out to no end, but as soon as you kind of learn exactly what it does and what the end result is, it's barely any different from cremation.
What do you think, Alice? The Google is kind of auto blurring it. What is the pyramid behind you on the wall? Is that a picture of a temple, a ziggurat, or is that like an artwork? I can't.
No, it's not. It is That one down.
Okay, it's a mountain. Yeah, gotcha.
That's a mountain with different pieces of it's not a pyramid.
Yeah.
And a map of my dreamscape up there that I've been working on. Yeah, I love the idea of like green cemeteries. I mean, it has to catch on at some point. I mean, and wasn't it true, Kearney, you probably would know this, wasn't it true that cemeteries used to be where people would go out and picnic in the cemeteries, and it was like a fun place that people would go with the family on the weekend?
Yeah, that was a big thing, particularly during the Victorian age, because I mean the big problem was urban cemeteries in places like London were just not sustainable. You could not. They were literally like they were burying people on top of each other and running out of room. Like you would go 6 inches down, hit a coffin lid kind of thing. There was a reason that people thought that urban cemeteries were, gross, nasty places. Because when you have that many bodies in one place, it doesn't matter if they're under the soil; it's still going to smell bad. It's still going to be like nasty. So they started a movement to try and do kind of these rural cemeteries. These like the one of the first big, I don't remember what the first big necropoli was, but I know it was a member of the royal family got married to a commoner. So they were unable to be buried in the standard accommodations. So instead, they got a nice little tomb in one of these rural cemeteries, and that was kind of the thing that kicked it all off. As soon as one of the royal family did it, everyone was like, "Okay, I want my tomb now." And so they very much used to be places you could go out and picnic, places you could go for a walk. Modern cemeteries are generally not nearly as interesting, obviously. But that's what they initially started out, both as a method of figuring out what to do with urban cemeteries, but also it was just like, this is a nice green space we can enjoy. This is a nice third space we could have.
Yeah, even buttoned up repressive Victoria was a lot better at death than we are now. I mean, you ever seen those hair flowers? They would make the relatives' hair into like decoration, like ornaments that you kept around your house.
And they took photos.
Oh yeah. And the photography.
There's a picture floating around of my grandfather's little brother who died when he was maybe 2 or something. And there's a death photo that we found in some albums somewhere. And I don't know, it's so sad to me. It really is. See the photo of this beautiful little baby but that was such a thing. I mean, they were very comfortable getting up and close with death in those ways.
Or Memento Mori hung around to the Victorian period. I think it started medieval, maybe. Do you know that one, Kearney? Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, Memento Mori. I mean, there's always been examples of Memento Mori going back as far as like the Romans loved.
Do you remember the incident at Swanee with the bone?
No,
Swanee. You might have left before that, but that somebody basically like was doing work on a building or something, and they found bones, and so, like the police had to come and stuff. But it was just an office. I think it was what was it? I think it was the admissions office. Like somebody found like a femur on the keyboard that fell out of the ceiling.
Like human hair and bones.
What weird school? But then the police were like, "No, this is hundreds of years old. It's fine." And they think the best guess of it was somebody's memento mori that at one point it had somehow made its way into the drop ceiling because Swanee was old Civil War Academy. Some of that was still going on. But the memento mori tradition, they basically usually a transition place when you graduated school or were starting a job or married, whatever. They'll just give you a bone and be like, "Remember, you die eventually, so make it count."
And
you keep a little bone around.
That's what I'm going to start doing.
A human bone, not just any bone.
Now I'm going to start I'm going to make sure I carry like just human vertebrae on me, and when I meet people for the first time, I'm going to give them one when I'm probably saying goodbye, and just, "Hey, remember, you're going to die one day."
So you're upselling the memento mori. I'm going to get a whole skeleton on my back and give it a piggyback ride because I really want to make my life matter. I'm taking it everywhere.
I am going on Shark Tank with my new future memento mori. It's going to be a great thing. But memento mori have a history. I mean, the Romans had them. There's a famous example of it's not a fresco. It's a mosaic in Pompeii of a skeleton holding two wine jugs, like the dangers of drinking. And of course, memento mori got They got big boosts throughout history. Of course, the plague.
It's the first anti-drugs ad.
Yeah. I mean,
how do you Latinize Nancy Reagan? What is that?
I've actually when I was in high school, I was fortunate enough.
Regus Septimus.
I was fortunate enough in high school to be able to take a Europe trip and go see in Switzerland. I went through a little town that had actual like plague art on on some of its bridges. So seeing some of the the dance macabre scenes of dancing skeletons and stuff is very cool. There was a little while during the Renaissance that cadaver tombs got very popular. It was like the chic thing was, instead of showing yourself on top of your tomb in effigy, you would show the rotting version of yourself on top of your effigy. So they went through this very nice, like, we kind of like the Dark Souls aesthetic and went hard into that for a little while. I would love to see something like that make a comeback. My God, our death rituals are so sterile. I want to see start slapping some like bas relief skulls and stuff again.
Yeah, the Party City, skeleton. Is that really the the height of what we should do? We just get out of Halloween.
Look, I think that we need a little less capitalism in funerals and a little more Party City. And I mean that only partly ironically.
I've kind of been conditioned growing up to think that skeletons sound like Cab Calloway. Like that's what I imagine that they sound like. Have you seen that? Have you seen that skeleton that they're selling now that's like 20 feet tall or something? I think they haven't seen it.
All the goobers over in places like Trustful. I mean, when they're trying to outdo each other with their Halloween decorations, when they're not the people that are like so against Halloween.
The skeletons are like doing a cheerleader triangle more.
I've seen some great, I remember there's one house over on Trustful Clay Road where they always go all out every year. Like I deliberately try and drive by there in October because it's like, ooh, what are they doing? And I remember last time they had like 3 of those giant skeletons out, like doing various things. I was like, you guys have maybe a little too much disposable income.
Right.
They're not even that much. I thought there was like some serious investment. Evidently, the going rate of a giant skeleton is a lot. There's a lot more of them than there were in the P.T. Barnum days.
Yes.
It's more about the cost of having to have an entire storage room to store all of your the bones.
Massive skeleton. Well, it's like now someone can go do the Cardiff Giant hoax, but now they actually have a skeleton to build off of.
Yeah, I don't think that works anymore now that you can get them at Sam's Club. Hey guys, look what I dug up in my yard. The origin of P.T. Barnum's circus, for anyone unfamiliar, is that he made and buried a giant fake skeleton and then dug it up and said he planted a field and then would charge you a nickel to look, take a peek.
But fun fact, the Cardiff Giant actually it was a grift of a grift.
He copied the farmer. He tried to buy it from the farmer for $20, and the farmer said no, and he made his own.
There was a farmer who's just like basically tired of all his extremely religious friends like talking what he considered gobbledygook. So it's like
he said it was like an Enochian giant, didn't he? Like it was from Bible times. Yeah,
he was riffing on biblical giants because he was basically like, I'm going to show these fucking goobers like that. No, this is dumb. I'm going to trick all of you. But then P.T. Barnum saw it, was like, this is really cool. Can I buy it from you? And he said no. So P.T. Barnum just made his own and claimed it was the original because P.T. Barnum had no shame and was incredibly based.
Yeah, that's why with that movie that came out a couple years ago where I didn't see it, but the trailer, like they were like, he just wanted children to smile. I was like, no, this is not what P.T. Barnum did.
I said that to Ginny the other day. Like, there's some scene of Hugh Jackman saying to the bearded lady, like, they don't understand you now.
Yeah,
they will one day. It's like no, the real P.T. Barnum would have been like, "No, get back out there, sweetie. You got
like this is." It's such a weird screenwriting thing that like whenever you buy the rights to some horrible American family or American story, you have to make it about how they really just wanted to build a family.
Oh man! Wait for when they try and rehabilitate the Sacklers with like a nice dramatic, romantic comedy.
Yeah, I don't know. Death in film. That's another direction. That's kind of interesting. Well, I don't know. I don't want to keep you guys too much. Is there anything that we don't get to, or something that seems relevant? Or I remember the reason I started talking about the giant skeleton thing is Alex. She's a really good local therapist. Her name just started Ember Wellness. you're looking for somewhere, but that she had one of the giant skeletons in her yard, and we were like brainstorming, trying to come up with ways to keep it around for all the holidays, like putting it in a turkey costume or put bunny ears on it, or, have like a nativity of skeletons or something. And it was like, yeah, we should bring back
I love that.
to the awareness of death and these other holidays. Yeah, it's spring now, the chickens and the baby bunnies are hatching, but just wait. Hang on a minute.
I actually, one year, and I still haven't.
Persephone will have to go away.
I've got a half skeleton that I actually built up into a little ground burster zombie, and it was the weirdest, like most uncomfortable process, because the way you do it is you just start with one of these plastic skeletons and start stretching pantyhose over it, so you feel like you're like doing some real weird like serial killer stuff. But once you get that panty, that forms the basis.
No, Mom, I was just making a Halloween decoration. No,
that's not what you think.
Yeah.
But you start painting on liquid latex, and you actually get like an okay skin. It starts to look kind of like a mummy. And I dressed him. I went to the thrift store and found a child-sized suit and put this half skeleton in a suit. And so I had him like bursting out of the ground one of these Halloweens. I need to put him out again. Maybe I will for this year.
I'm gonna put it in the taproot, yard. Before the 31st. You're welcome to just turn left at the.
I'm just gonna start. What I'll start doing is I'll start cranking out. Like I'll get better and better at making these corpses. I'll start cranking them out, and I'll just start leaving them at your therapy place over time. And you can do them whatever the heck you want. I'm just leaving them there. You do. They'll already be dressed. They'll be good to go. You just decide what you want to do.
Well, we can totally use it as a topic for therapy. It's like the person who comes in.
Well, it's just you have yourself in the main chair in the office. Then you have the skeleton in a corner chair. And the thing is, if anyone asks about it, just pretend it's not there. Just like, what are you talking about? What skeleton?
Right. Yeah.
You just have it on a little fainting couch.
Is the skeleton in the room right now with us?
Yeah, you talk about its mom issues.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun. Thank you for inviting me on, because I do love to, in my own amateurish way, talk shop about death stuff. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, anything we don't get to, either y'all. I don't. I'm about to go back to the office and move furniture, so I'm not in a huge rush. But I don't want to keep y'all past the expiry. What any topics of interest or anything?
Well, I'll say. If any viewers want to continue reading about any of this stuff, again, any of the Caitlin Dougherty books are fantastic. And I mean, even just her YouTube channel is great. Her video explaining New Orleans oven crepes is literally what verbatim I probably quoted to you a little while back, Joe. And so
I always blank on the title. Is it From Here? Because it's something to eternity, but I always say the one that...
I believe it's From Here to Eternity. Yeah.
Okay, but isn't From Here to Eternity the movie from the 70s where they make out in the waves, though? Do they have the same title? Or is that a different one?
No, I wasn't.
You know what I'm talking about? Like they parody it in Airplane, because when the wave comes up, there's like crabs and fish and stuff on them.
Man, I wasn't even...
Did she name it that?
Beam in my parents' eyes then. Like, good Lord. Yeah, I have no idea. I mean, that's I remember recently when that movie The Whale came out, I real quick just wanted to look at IMDb. I was curious. I like Brendan Fraser. And then when I saw like 4 other titles also called The Whale, I was like, damn, Aronofsky, come on, man. Couldn't you the cetacean? I bet no one's done that. That probably doesn't have the same kick as The Whale, but.
So if you're watching people make out in the water in waves, then you've bought not only the wrong medium, but the wrong book. So Caitlin Dougherty, From Here to Eternity.
Yeah, from here to eternity. Yeah, if you're reading about people making out in the waves and not about the interesting Torajan culture from Indonesia, then yes, you have indeed picked up the wrong book.
Alex, you got anything?
No, not in particular. There's the book Stiff by Mary Roach, which is a really, really great
Thank you for bringing that one up. That one's also excellent.
Yeah, about how they take care of bodies and just everything to do with what we're talking about, basically.
Yeah. They go into the body form briefly in that book as well. And a lot of the topics, at least regarding the American funeral industry, there's a book from the 1950s called The American Way of Death. My mother, God bless her, found a a first edition at the thrift store. That was one of my prized old books. Yeah. And the funny thing is I flipped through it and I was just shaking my head because all the problems it mentions in this book published in the 1950s, exact same issues we have today. It has not changed one iota. The prices have just changed because of inflation. That's it. That is it.
They probably have some sillier names, you know, the Carnival Barker, you know, upsell.
Is it still the same people who manufacture? Is it like caskets and things? Like, I wonder if it's is it sort of a monopoly?
I know at least
Luxottica.
I'm pretty sure hearses are a monopoly because those are literally made to order. They don't make hearses unless you order one.
Oh,
fun fact. Yeah, they do.
That'd be a good small business own. It sounds like good money.
Yeah. No, we need to. That would actually. That would be one area that you know. Yeah, good small business. Do that in the funeral industry. We should have a Ma and Pop's casket store.
Yeah.
They're legally required to take a casket if you order it from outside the funeral home. Never let them tell you otherwise.
Right. Yeah, and they don't tell you that you can choose cremation either. They like wait for you to bring that up, or they try to move really quickly through that.
It is wild what they put. I mean, it just is, you know, do you want fries with that? And you want to supersize it? I mean, it just continues to go.
Like come in this room and look at these 3 caskets that are here that you can choose between, and then choose the vault. And because that's a big, you know, we don't even talk about the vault, but that's a big thing.
Do you want a crying angel to go on top of that?
Yeah. Well, and it was with my grandmother's funeral. My aunt was she was like, we're going to get the most basic casket, which was beautiful and just wood. And, you know, they act like that's the one that, you know, you're really skimping on if you get, but it's actually the prettiest one to me. But she was like, no, but we're spending the money on the vault. That's where you spend the money, is on the vault and not on the casket. So that, but I don't know. I mean, I was like, okay.
Vaults are actually far more for aesthetic considerations of the landscape rather than actually for anything protective. Vaults don't. The thing particular, and this, we're about to get into a little bit of gross detail here, but while we're talking about it, one of the issues with any kind of, if they tell you like, oh, we've got a ceiling casket with gaskets and a ceiling vault, is you don't want everything perfectly sealed. That promotes anaerobic decomposition, stuff that exists without oxygen, and that's the nasty decom. You want the body to be exposed to the elements to a certain degree, even if it's just allowing like water and some air in there, because otherwise you get soup. To put it bluntly.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, they crack it anyway because they want you to decompose, you know, when they bury you. Like, right?
Yeah. It's just there have been instances in the past in improperly maintained mausoleums. They have something called exploding casket syndrome, which is when the pressure builds up too much and the front of the mausoleum begins to leak. Yeah, it's corpse disposal is a gross thing. I mean, probably.
What's the average price? I mean, if you go in, you get the hearse, you get the pink lacquered casket with the gold, what's the average funeral cost?
They're probably going to try and sell you on like a standard traditional funeral, which is basically the full package. They want you to just get everything. At least like here in Alabama, I think I've seen prices around, probably you'd be spending $5,000 to $6,000.
Wow.
Yeah, for basically the world's like worst mixer. Effectively. Again, that's why we cut out with my grandmother. We cut out the funeral entirely and did a crib size something. Like there wasn't even anyone from the funeral home there. It was literally just us, the family.
You hang out in that little room with the Greek pictures and
we actually
oil paintings and
we hung
red
out.
lights.
We hung out in the mausoleum itself. Like we were in there, and I mean, that is nice. A properly maintained mausoleum usually does not smell like anything, and it's very, very quiet. I used to, that cemetery she's buried in, it's right across from a big shopping center in Trussville. I used to work at a couple of stores over there. And I remember when I got set up on my break, and I was like, I got to get away from just like everybody. I don't want to see my coworkers' faces. I don't want to see the customers. I don't see anybody. I would actually just drive across the street, go sit in that mausoleum, and I wouldn't be doing anything more, but I'd just be like on my phone, like scrolling through mods for Skyrim or whatever. just sitting in the, because it's quiet, it's peaceful.
Yeah.
No one's gonna bother me.
It's a good place to play Dark Souls, you know.
Yes, an excellent place. Yeah, lots of quiet and solitude, unless someone tries to come kick you out or something. But
I guess if it's your family crypt, they can, right? Like,
well, yeah, we're not.
At least you get
like if you're not creating no disturbance, it's fine. But at least that's also the nice thing about my family is whenever we have a loved one pass on, it's generally not a super somber affair because I mean we'll have some tears, but often it's a circle of telling funny stories about the person. Telling funny stories or making jokes about our own future demises. I remember Mom at my great grandmother's funeral made a quip about, we ought to, if we cremated her, what if we threw her in with a bag of popcorn, and popped it, and then called the game "What's Eating Mom." It's like just again like these very morbid jokes, but that gallows humor, at least for us, it really does help. Because I mean my family is pretty down to earth and logical, and we all know that death will come eventually, and we're all kind of planning for, hey, don't make a big fuss out of it and have a few larfs, because I mean that's the only thing you can do at that juncture is have your tears, but then laugh about all the good times.
Well, and I think therapeutically and spiritually and philosophically, it's not that death is absurd. It's that death kind of makes life absurd.
Yes.
Like we feel like we really care so much about, getting the iPhone, 13 or whatever. It's kind of helpful to pick up your skull and look into its York's eyes and be like, yeah, you know what? Maybe this is kind
Joel,
of.
I just want you to know, if I'm ever in the unfortunate circumstance where I must eulogize you, one of the things I am going to mention is your cackle is one of the things I wanted to talk about extensively, because you have one of the most infectious laughs I've ever heard on a person.
And then right when you finish the line and the audience laughs, you'll hear the cackle coming from the crypt.
I remember
it'll be too late.
I remember way too many times, like you and I have been joking about something, and I've been doubled over laughing. Honestly, not because even what we were talking about in the beginning was that funny. It's because you're laughing so hard, it's making me laugh. Oh man,
there was a pretty good riff about a family being upsold at a funeral home that I won't repeat. But yeah, couldn't breathe.
Yeah, I do. No, I do remember that day. That was a. I'm glad we got off the interstate when we did. I literally had to pull over as TV. I remember we were like, "Woo, man!" I'm glad that we were able to pay attention to driving and laugh that hard.
Well, just to kind of close out, do you have anything from more of a therapeutic perspective, Alice? I do think that a lot of times one of the more damaging things we can do as therapists is avoid something that the patient wants to go through, and our fear that they won't be comfortable with it means we avoid things. And a lot of times that's death. When I bring up kind of uncomfortable topics, but especially the fear of death, I think that's when people kind of bloom and open up, because no one else gave them space to talk about that. It's not really that we are afraid of it as much as that we are afraid other people are afraid of it. And then that makes us feel alone. I see that dynamic a lot with a lot of issues.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I don't mean to keep bringing it back to kids, but I feel like with teenagers that it's like honoring, because they actually want to talk about death, or they're like, it's a not comfortable topic, but sort of, insofar as it can be comfortable. I feel like teenagers are the demographic that want to talk about it. Scares them, but they also don't, they're kind of aware that it's this thing that all the people in their lives, the adults, don't really talk about. And that's around the age too, where you've maybe had a couple people your own age who've died. Like going to a funeral of another kid was a big thing, at least for me. Yeah. But I'm trying to think. I don't know. Is there any, did you have any clients in particular that you remember kind of working with around this?
Yeah, there's a lot of cases. I mean, teenagers is a good point though. I mean, like I'm talking. I started with a joke about how people dress at Hot Topic that were Gothic when I was in high school. But I mean, there's a reason that teenagers do that, right? Like they're kind of being like, you know, I'm not just I'm edgy, I'm different, but also like I'm okay with this thing. You know, that you don't. I'm going to remind you of you know something subversive.
Like a way that you can't control me.
Yeah. And one of that is kind of, I mean, that's sort of when you are, you know, I mean, you're wearing an ankh, and that maybe is more 80s Gothic than 2005, you know, but like wearing the you know, dressing, like, you know, Death from Sandman, or, you know, the all black, you know, black lipstick. And I mean, a lot of that is kind of saying I'm comfortable with the other side. I see through the lies of society, man, you know, when you're 13, and in a way that's a healthy developmental phase, you know, to say this thing's kind of scary, but I'm going to sit with it, and I'm going to, you know, play with other people's reaction to this thing that they're uncomfortable with. Just what you're supposed to do when you're a teenager, I guess.
I mean, I guess same thing as like sex education is if you have death phobic, you know, if you're death phobic, then it's like you're not doing the teenager any favors by not exposing them to it and teaching them something about it in a safe situation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, actually, I had mentioned the ankh, Alex. I know that means life, right? But we kind of associate it with death. Do you know the history
I'm
of that?
wearing an ankh.
Yeah. Yeah.
Don't look. I'm not an 80s. What did you say?
No, that's why I was saying you're wearing an ankh. That's why I mentioned it. I wasn't.
Yeah.
Like, oh no. I mean.
Yeah.
It's cool.
So to me, so the cross is representative of. So I have some divergent views about this, but the cross is representative of like the energy goes up and kind of stops on the, like and then goes back into the earth. But with the ankh, it's a circle at the top. So you have where the energy stops on the side, but it keeps circulating. So it's like, it's more of a, like Christianity is, you know, talks about being about eternal life, but they really just focus on death. I mean, it just feels like it's all about death. Like no sooner do you hear about baby Jesus when you're little than, you know, they kill him off, and doesn't. And I think the ankh, you know, from ancient Egypt is they really believed in the afterlife and in reincarnation, and it's kind of this symbol of life flowing with their not just being like done. It's like everything flows.
And it's such an interesting irony. I mean, you're talking about this life force or going back into whatever, but then they were the ultimate, you know, preservationists. What is, you know, mummies? Like you were supposed to be there forever in the room with the stuff. You know, hopefully nobody steals it because I'll need it.
Well, and it's more of like a preparation for reincarnation, because a lot of the, you know, the tombs of Osiris was Isis trying to bring back her brother Love, her twin.
Putting the body back together was the myth, you know.
Up on an electromagnetic grid so that certain things would line up with the sun, and, you know, different astrological signs waiting for, you know, trying to get the spirit to come back.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the ritual around death, is that we know that this is an ending and we're trying to connect it to something else. So whether you're doing that with, you know, astrology or community or, you know, more organized religion or in nature, I mean, that is the ritual around death, is this is kind of an ending, but yet things go on. How do we point to that? How do we symbolically recreate that? And, you know, what that thing is that you're connecting to the next step is going to be informed by your faith and your culture and a lot of things. But, you know, all those death rituals are an attempt to do that, you know. What comes next.
Right. Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate you guys sitting down and talking. This is great. And, you know, happy Halloween, everybody. I hope you have a good October.
Yeah.
Don't sing if you want to live long. They have no use for your song. You're dead, you're dead, you're dead, you're dead and out of this world. You'll never get a second chance. Plan all your moves in advance. Stay dead, stay dead, stay dead, stay dead and out of this world.